The Mafia has been around for about 2,000 years. For example, in 50 BC, the Milo and Clodius gangs fought for control of Rome, and in the 6th century AD, the Emperor of Constantinople relied completely on the support of the Blue and Green gangs. When they all united against Justinian, they burned half the city. In the Middle Ages, banditry was a common activity, because the police did not yet exist, so people were forced to take power into their own hands. Usually the gangs were led by nobles or former soldiers. We will tell you about some of the Anglo-Saxon bandits who lived and traded in the Middle Ages. Baron John Fitzwalter. Despite his noble birth, he terrorized all of Essex. He was engaged in racketeering, took away cattle from the owners, and any goods he liked from the merchants. He never paid taxes that he owed to the royal treasury. He was so influential that there was no justice for him. The royal judges refused to conduct his criminal cases. But he still could not escape justice. The king himself became interested in the tricks of Baron Fitzwalter. The bandit was arrested with confiscation of property. He sat in the tower for a year, after which he was pardoned on the condition that he pay a fine of £847 sterling, a huge amount at that time. The baron paid the fine until his death. The Varant family, 5 members of the gang, which consisted of close relatives, brothers and sisters. To survive, they hunted by theft and robbery in Norfolk, East Anglia. They were repeatedly judged. One of the brothers was hanged by court order. The rest managed to avoid punishment. For their career they have earned not so much. Malcolm Musard lived and worked in Worcestershire during the time of King Edward II. This guy was engaged in more serious criminal cases, robberies, murders, and other outrages. Malcolm managed to avoid trial and punishment several times, but when he helped organize an uprising in 1323, Edward II himself drew close attention to him. Malcolm was arrested and put on trial, and in 1326 was granted an amnesty. This misadventure taught him nothing, and he continued his robbery deeds until Queen Isabella gave the order to find the bandit and conclude without the right to parole. However, in 1330, Edward III pardoned him. Fulk III Fitzwarren. This lord was not really a gangster. He was outlawed because his Whittington castle was unfairly transferred by King John the Landless to Maurice de Palace. The reason for this behavior is still unknown. Fulk was not going to part with his family castle, and he longed for justice, so he did not think of anything smarter than organizing an uprising against the king. The uprising was crushed, the rebel was pardoned, and after paying the fine, the king decided to return Whittington Castle to its rightful owner, Fulk III Fitzwarren. Historians still do not understand why these extra gestures were needed. They would have given the castle to Fulk right away and would have avoided all problems. After the problem with the castle was settled, Fulk even became friends with the English kings, gave them advice and helped in negotiations. Fallville gang. In the Middle Ages, only the eldest son of the landowner inherited all the property, while the rest lived as they would. Some joined the retinue of knights and sought fame and fortune, others became criminals. In the case of the Fallvilles, it was like that. The elder brother John inherited his father's property and began to live, and his 4 younger brothers had no choice but to become robbers, because they did not know how to do anything else. The brothers became hired hitmen and were outside the law, or took it into their own hands. They dealt with their victims with particular cruelty. It is noteworthy that they always managed to avoid arrest. It was an elusive gang. Once, however, they were almost caught. The judge issued a warrant for their arrest, but they kidnapped him, and then pretended to have found and released him. Not only did the judge annul the arrest warrant, but also paid a ransom, £1,300. After that, King Edward III still employed the guys. He accepted them into the service of the English army and sent them to war, where they selflessly fought with the Scots. They never answered for their crimes. Dispensers. It was a real mafia in the modern sense of the word, because the King of England himself was a puppet in the hands of members of the group. The gang included the King's Chamberlain, the closest confidants of the monarch, administrators, diplomats, and other dignitaries of noble birth. They systematically abused royal power in order to seize foreign lands, imprisoned those landowners who did not want to part with their possessions, did not let anyone near the king, even his wife, extorted money and titles from the nobles, and intimidated them. All their actions led to the fact that a civil war broke out in the country. Queen Isabella, who understood that her husband was a toy in the hands of the court mafia, convinced him that the members of this group should be judged. By court decision, high-ranking bandits were brutally executed. Adam the Leper, the leader of the gang, did not suffer from leprosy, it's just a nickname. Robbed the personal jewelry supplier of Queen Philippa of Genego. The criminal with his gang came to the house of the supplier, demanded to take out all the jewelry and money, and when he refused, the criminals tied him up, ransacked the dwelling, took out all the valuables, and set the house and the owner on fire. After that, the leper lived for another 20 years, quietly robbing people. Punishment did not befall him, because the list of his victims did not include anyone from the cream of society. Roger Godbird. Everyone has heard the myth of Robin Hood, but Roger Godbird was his prototype. He hunted in Sherwood and was caught by the Sheriff of Nottingham for robbery and poaching in Sherwood Forest. For reasons unknown to historians, the king pardoned Godbird, and he continued robbery and illegal killing of deer, after which the Sheriff of Nottingham again arrested him and took him into custody. But the robber was lucky. The knight Richard Folliot helped him escape from prison. After that, the robber calmed down and lived peacefully for another 20 years. Gang of Coaterls. They acted at the same time, in the same place and according to the same principle as the Fauvilles. They even cooperated. Remember the kidnapping of the judge? In this case, they participated together. The ransom was then divided. Racketeering and robbery were their usual trade, but the thugs did not disdain murders either. For example, during a raid on one of the possessions of the Earl of Lancaster, they tortured the Earl so zealously that they killed him. Because of this, they began to search for the representatives of the law. It seems strange, but Queen Isabella favored them. In the midst of their criminal activities, she helped one of the brothers acquire land. While the criminals were wanted for murder, another military campaign broke out between England and Scotland, so the Coateril brothers took the opportunity and left to fight, for which they were pardoned by the king and freed from legal prosecution. By the way, one of the Coateril brothers owed £100 to one of the Fauvilles, Johnny Armstrong. This man of noble origin was the leader of a large gang, glorified in the ballad of the same name. He robbed big. He attacked entire villages and even cities, captured them. People who could not defend themselves were forced to burn their houses along with their contents and animals, while they themselves fled wherever they looked. Despite the fact that the authorities had an extensive dossier on Armstrong, he managed to avoid punishment because he was a vassal of Lord Maxwell. But in the end, Lord Dacre took personal control of the investigation of Armstrong's crimes. In 1530, the King of Scotland, James V, decided once and for all to rid the country of evil spirits that rob honest people. On his orders, Johnny Armstrong and 24 other members of his gang were ostentatiously executed by hanging. By the way, American astronaut Neil Armstrong is a descendant of this bandit.